What is up, basketball fans? Welcome to another live edition of the NBA Outlet. We're talking NBA trade deadline. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, Kory Waldron. What's up, Kory? How you doing?
I'm talking with a floating head. I can't see your body. I can't see. It's just your head. But NBA trade deadline. It's Christmas today, and it didn't really disappoint.
Yeah, happy holidays. I got the camo shirt, so you can't even see where I'm at. But, plenty of trades. I think we have over 20 trades in the last few days, big trades, small trades, salary trades, all types, as always. And we touched on about 5 or 6 of them yesterday. You want to check out those 5 or 6 trades, Tobias Harris, Reggie Bullock, stuff like that. iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, Google Play, Dash Radio, and YouTube. But today we'll get right into it, Kory. We'll start with that Houston, Cleveland, Sacramento trade we saw last night. Houston receives Iman Shumpert, Nick Stauskas, Wade Baldwin. Cleveland receives Brandon Knight, Marquise Chris, the first-round pick, and Sacramento receives Alec Burks.
I mean, not a bad deal. Iman Shumpert was a name that we threw out on the NBA Outlet, which feels like, basically every other week we're mentioning Iman Shumpert. So a good pick for the Rockets and him. I actually kind of preferred – I would have actually preferred them getting Alec Burks, I think, just for the scoring output is a little bit better, I think, for Burks. But Kings get a nice piece back in that. And the Cavaliers, they're doing this rebuild right. They got another young asset in Marquise Chris who can maybe find a second life in Cleveland and then a first-round draft pick. And Brandon Knight's just a filler, but it's an okay trade.
Yeah, I think Cleveland has done a really good job of rebuilding, especially for a team that didn't have any young assets going into the year. They had a couple pretty good players. Nobody on that team other than Kevin Love, who's an all-star, who's out right now. So getting a first-round pick, they got a couple other second-round picks this year. I think they got another first-round pick or like a heavily protected one from Milwaukee. So I think from the Cavs side, it's a good trade. Bad team doing what they're supposed to. Sacramento getting Burks, a little depth on that bench. Houston, obviously, we'll talk about the other 2 guys they traded in Stauskas and Baldwin later, but Shumpert's a solid guy. He's played against the Warriors a little bit. Nothing crazy. He's not going to move the needle, but not a bad trade overall. And they got rid of the Brandon Knight contract, and I think Shumpert's an expiring. So they will help themselves in cap space for the summer. On to the next trade. We got a lot to go through, so we'll be kind of moving through them somewhat quickly. Sacramento and Dallas. This happened almost like right as we popped off the show yesterday. Harrison Barnes is going to Sacramento. Dallas is getting Justin Jackson and Zach Randolph.
I mean, this trade in particular caused, I don't want to say like an uproar.
Ruckus.
Ruckus. That's a good word to use. Because obviously, to those who don't know, Harrison Barnes played 25 minutes last night and was traded midway through the game last night in Dallas. Some people said that he knew the rumors of him possibly being traded to either Charlotte or Sacramento before the game. Then it came out today from Tracy McGrady on The Jump that from who people he talked to, Harrison Barnes had absolutely no idea why he got pulled from the game until someone told him, which is messy. That's a little bit messy. If Harrison Barnes had no idea he was on the trade market or whatnot and gets traded mid-game, it's not a great look. I know LeBron James wasn't very happy with it. But to the trade itself, I love it for the Sacramento Kings. I mean, De'Aaron Fox, Buddy Hield, Harrison Barnes, Marvin Bagley, Bogdanovich, they managed to keep as well off the bench. I think the Kings made a really good move here because also Harrison Barnes is going to probably accept his player option next year and remain with the team. So I think the Kings, who aren't really a free agent destination, get a nice little young core moving forward.
Yeah, not a bad move for them. Obviously, the contract's pretty big. I think there was already chatter possibly about Harrison Barnes, the Kings wanting him to opt out and then offer him a long-term deal, something to keep an eye on as well. I think from the Dallas perspective, getting Justin Jackson, Zach Randolph's obviously already waived. Justin Jackson, a young piece, cost, not very expensive, a guy you can kind of keep around that's going to be a depth piece. And they open up a ton of salary for the summer. So now they're back in that free agent race. Now they have Luka, KP locked up, possibly, and now they can add another big star to that. So from the Dallas side, I really like it. And the Sacramento side, I think it's pretty good. Harrison Barnes, it's a guy they've been connected to for a while now. And also they were looking at Otto Porter, all types of different wings. So they finally get their wing that has some good size.
Yeah, no doubt. The Kings were going to get either Porter Jr. or Barnes, I think. That's how I kind of felt going into today or going into yesterday. And, that was what they did. And the Mavericks, like you said, now they got cap room to really operate and maybe bring in, an all-star level player to pair up with Doncic and Porzingis. It's looking good for Mark Cuban and the Mavs.
Yeah, DeMarcus Cousins is a name that comes to mind that's been connected to Dallas a lot. So something to keep an eye on, obviously. Going over to the next one, New Orleans and Washington. Markieff Morris and a 2023 second-round pick going to New Orleans, and Washington's receiving Wesley Johnson. This is pretty much a salary move. Markieff Morris is banged up, and Washington was looking to get under the luxury tax.
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the 2 moves Washington made yesterday. It was It was interesting, I think. I mean, moving Markieff Morris, who hasn't played in a couple weeks because of a neck injury, it's whatever. They're just moving pieces around. It doesn't really do much for either side. The Pelicans get another draft pick, which kind of helps them since we know Anthony Davis, who was not moved, will likely be moved at some point in the future. They're stockpiling some assets, so I'm okay with it.
Yeah, exactly. For New Orleans, it's exactly what you're supposed to do, get another draft pick. And obviously Washington wants to get under that luxury tax. They've had a rough season in terms of on the court, off the court, that John Wall injury. But on to the next trade, Houston and Philadelphia. Houston receives a 2021 second-round pick. Philadelphia gets James Ennis.
Yeah, I mean, the Sixers get a rotational player. Their bench unit was kind of what we talked about or concerned about slightly after getting Tobias Harris. What's that bench unit going to look like? James Ennis is okay, decent defender, offense a little bit streaky. Houston gets a nice little second-round draft pick involved. It's an okay move for the Philly, who's just trying to get some depth.
Yeah, honestly, it feels like the first time Houston's got a draft pick in a trade in a really long time. Usually they're sending out a first or a second or something, trying to get some depth. Like you said, Philadelphia, they kind of cleared out some of their bench pieces with some of the recent trades. James Ennis gives them some solid depth. Nothing too crazy, but a solid guy. On to the next trade, though, we got New Orleans and Milwaukee. This is probably one of the bigger ones of the day. New Orleans receives Jason Smith, Stanley Johnson, 4 future second-round picks, and Milwaukee gets Nikola Mirotic.
4. Not 1, not 2, not 3, 4 second-round draft picks. Yeah, what a haul for the Pelicans. I think this is a good move for them, obviously going forward, and then for the Bucks. I mean, Mirotic is the ideal stretch for them. More shooting for Antetokounmpo. I know you had a tweet earlier that at times Brook Lopez is kind of a defensive liability. You may not be able to play him in certain playoff series, but Mirotic could play at the 4 and Antetokounmpo at the 5. So I think it just made the Bucks a lot more dangerous.
Yeah, it really did. It took them to a whole nother level. Like you mentioned with the Brook Lopez thing, like there's going to be times in the playoffs where teams try to expose him or get him switched on him. And obviously he's not laterally quick to defend somebody on the perimeter. Mirotic is an amazing defender, but he's definitely a step up from Brook when it comes to perimeter defense. Now they just have so much shooting, so much spacing. You mentioned the second-round picks. Also, Milwaukee's going all in because I know they traded a couple of their first-round picks and that Eric Bledsoe trade, a trade in Cleveland as well. So they're going all in for Giannis and trying to win this year. And I think this trade really does take them another level. And they already have the best record either in the NBA or at least in the Eastern Conference.
It's watch out for Milwaukee. What they scored last night, like 160-plus points. They didn't even have Mirotic. They didn't lose anyone who helped them score that many points last night. They had 85 in the first half, for Christ's sakes. I mean, yeah, this offense has got a lot better. It's going to be fun to see.
Yeah, and from the New Orleans side, they did their thing. They got four second-round picks. Ideally, they maybe wanted a first, but four second-round picks is going to do the deal, and Stanley Johnson is not a bad guy to take a flyer on, right?
Definitely not. I mean, he's still young. The change of scenery, we mentioned this when he first got traded to Milwaukee, maybe it could help the change of scenery. The good thing about going to New Orleans is the fact that since they got rid of Wesley Johnson, there is a little bit more minutes for him to be had. He's probably going to get some opportunity to earn a rotational spot, but it's good for him.
Quick question to cut us off in between from grading the trades. One of our listeners wants to know, how would you grade this trade deadline from an entertainment value, Kory?
I would say I would give it a B. I think it could have been more exciting if we saw more names moved. There was a lot more, possibly a little bit more.
You're greedy.
I mean, it was still a very good deadline. I would give it a B, though, for entertainment. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I watched the Jump the entire duration, and my phone basically died 3 different times today. But it wasn't like, there wasn't a superstar moved.
Yeah, I will give it an A. I think we saw a lot of big names, and I'm including like the last few days too, including Tobias Harris. We saw Marc Gasol, we saw Mirotic. I mean, like obviously we didn't see Anthony Davis, but that we had a feeling wasn't going to happen. So I think it would get an A from me just because there were so many moves. Maybe there wasn't the quality, but the quantity was definitely there. Yeah,
no, the quantity was definitely there. I think I saw some stat that before today even happened, the amount of trades that happened last year was already matched last night going into today. So obviously a lot of trades happening.
Yeah, for sure. And then moving on to getting some more through these trades, like we said, we honestly got like at least 10 more to go through. Houston and Indiana, Houston receives a future second-round pick. The Pacers receive Nick Stauskas, Wade Baldwin.
The Pacers also got a second-round pick.
Yeah, I would assume. Yeah, and the Pacers also got a second-round pick. I would assume the pick that Houston received, if this is the correct report, was probably highly protected and is never going to convey. It's just something where you need to have something in the trade so it actually can happen. You can't do it for free.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It made sense for the Rockets. Their cap situation, as we know, is tight. They were trying to figure out some wiggle room. The Pacers were able to help them out. So I'm okay with it. I, for 1 second, was worried I was going to have to learn Nick Stauskas' last name, but I don't have to because he's not here. So don't worry about it. It ain't an issue for me.
Yeah, Nick Stauskas. There we go. We got to get there. He might be out of the NBA, so you might not have to worry about it. But that's for another day. On to the next trade. This is probably one of the bigger ones. Toronto and Memphis. Toronto receives Marc Gasol. Memphis receives Valanciunas, DeLon Wright, CJ Miles, and a second-round pick.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the two of the names that we heard a lot the last 48 hours were Marc Gasol and Mike Conley. Would both these guys get moved? Would one of these guys get moved? We heard rumblings about possibly Conley going to Toronto in a Kyle Lowry swap, and Toronto was interested in Memphis, but they got Marc Gasol. I think it makes sense for Toronto. They're going all in, obviously. You're trying to make the Eastern Conference Finals, the NBA Finals, because you got to try and keep Kawhi Leonard long-term. Marc Gasol is a proven center, a gritty guy. I think he kind of fits in with them. We mentioned him a little bit on the last show. In the Eastern Conference, you can probably beat up on some of these weaker teams, maybe have a longer lifespan in the NBA, opposed to being in the West, having to play in that fast-paced, all those teams being stacked style. Memphis gets, a second-round pick. Delon Wright is probably the biggest asset they're getting here as the backup point guard, well, maybe in the future point guard, depending on what happens with Mike Conley this upcoming offseason. Valanciunas is a filler. CJ Miles has been god-awful, so I'm sure Toronto didn't mind getting rid of him, but it just shows that the East, after the Tobias Harris trade, 48 hours ago, it made Toronto and Milwaukee say, all right, we need to do something to bolster our roster.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think a lot of teams saw, even the Bucks getting Mirotic kind of push the Raptors and make a move. I'll look at it from the Memphis side first. I think Valanciunas is a solid center. If they want to retain him, I think he has another year on his contract anyways, but if they want to keep him long-term, you could do a lot worse than Valanciunas. DeLon Wright, I think, is the prize asset in this deal. Wasn't getting a ton of minutes in Toronto. He did fill in when Lowry was out, but that's a guy who's a restricted free agent at the end of the year. CJ Miles, like you said, hasn't been great. Second-round pick's always good. Then Toronto side, Marc Gasol gives you a boost. He's not the Marc Gasol we've seen a few years ago that was Defensive Player of the Year, All-Star type player, but he's not going to be asked to do half as much in Toronto. Like, he's not even going to be, one of their top players. Like, he's a guy that's just going to be asked to do some of the dirty work, pass the ball, shoot open threes, make layups. Just gives him a nice boost, especially come playoff time. And I saw this brought up on Twitter as well. It gives him somebody who can defend Joel Embiid.
Yeah, speaking of Marc Gasol, as Joel Embiid is a great point. That's probably the best defensive center Toronto's going to could have had to face up against Joel Embiid, which is almost unguardable a lot of nights. And like you mentioned, offensively, he's the fourth option. It's Leonard, Lowry, Siakam maybe being the second option, Lowry the third, and Gasol is going to be the third or fourth option. So he's not going to be asked to do a lot offensively. He's actually one of the better playmaking centers we have in the NBA still. Obviously, he's a little bit up there and a little bit slower than he has been in the past, as you mentioned, but I think it's a really good move for Toronto. I think Marc Gasol fits in, and obviously he's always been around a defensive-minded culture, and he's going into another defensive-minded culture.
Yeah, and I think offensively, you mentioned the passing. He has Kawhi Leonard, Kyle Lowry, Danny Green, Siakam, all guys that have some versatility to their game, especially a guy like Siakam cutting to the rim and then open shooters on the floor. I look forward to it for Toronto. It definitely gave him a nice boost. I know some people aren't super high in the move, and it is risky in the sense that he does have another year on his contract, a player option that he's probably going to accept. If they do lose Kawhi, then they're going to have a ton of money locked up to older guys. But I think it's a risk you have to take to try to retain Kawhi.
Yeah, and I think, the risk factor, obviously it's a risk if you lose Kawhi and if you have, Gasol and Lowry going forward on those big contracts. But at least, silver lining, if you lose Leonard, your team isn't falling completely out of relevancy. I think Lowry and Gasol-led Raptors team is not ideal, but, that could still give them a mid-level seed in the East. Not that we want to look too far ahead.
Yeah, no, it definitely could hold them over. It's not like you could definitely do a lot worse or take a lot worse contracts on the books. But moving on from that trade, we got Memphis and the Clippers. Memphis receives Avery Bradley. The Clippers receive JaMychal Green and Garrett Temple.
Weird move. I got to say right off the bat, very weird move. Wasn't really expecting JaMychal Green or Garrett Temple to get moved to the Grizzlies, especially after all the to get moved to the Clippers, from the Grizzlies after all the rumors we heard after the Clippers dealing Tobias Harris. Kind of felt like they were going to go into like a minor like tank mode. And then Avery Bradley, obviously he's been kind of a dud. He goes into Memphis. It is what it is. The Clippers, though, looks like they're going to continue to push for a playoff spot.
Yeah, and both these guys are expiring for the Clippers, so that saves them a little money. Bradley's deal wasn't fully guaranteed next year. I think it was like $2 million guaranteed, but that's $2 million that can make all the difference in free agency. I don't have the full details on this trade, but I would assume that Memphis probably received a future second-round pick in this deal. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's what I would assume.
Yeah, it would make more sense if the Grizzlies got more back than Avery Bradley, who, as we know, he plays starter minutes. He plays like 35 minutes a game almost, but he's been a shell of himself since leaving the Boston Celtics offensive system.
Yeah, that's 100% true. Since leaving Boston, hasn't been very good. On to the next trade, a smaller one, Atlanta, Memphis. Atlanta receives Shelvin Mack. Memphis receives Tyler Dorsey.
So when I saw this trade, I thought, of course, Shelvin Mack getting moved. The last year he led the Orlando Magic in assists per game with like 4. And I also saw this deal, and I thought, okay, a Jeremy Lin trade is coming, because I thought Shelvin Mack comes in, he backs up Trae Young. You can then feel okay with letting go of Jeremy Lin. And obviously we didn't see that. This was the only move the Hawks made today. And, it's an okay move. You get a decent guard in Shelvin Mack. Memphis gets a young guy in Tyler Dorsey. But it was a weird move for me because there was nothing else to follow it for the Hawks.
Yeah, no, it was. And I think for the Hawks side, it's definitely interesting. Maybe it means they're going to buy out Jeremy Lin, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And I think from the Memphis side, Tyler Dorsey is not amazing, but he's shown a little bit of potential as a shooter. So that kind of gives him something there. Another question, though, from one of our viewers, Kory. Do you guys see Philly as a favorite in the East?
On paper, I think we discussed a little bit yesterday, but yeah, on paper, I think they're a favorite in the East. The Celtics obviously been up and down, but I mean, look at that starting 5. It's the best starting 5 in the Eastern Conference, I think, right now. I think you can make a case for the Bucks are probably pretty close, but I would say the Sixers. I give them an edge.
I would say that there probably isn't a clear-cut favorite in the East. I think of all those
cop out.
Yeah, it's a cop out. But like between Milwaukee, Toronto, Philadelphia, and Boston, there's just not enough to separate those teams to make you be like, oh yeah, this one's so much better than the other. Like, the playoffs are a couple of months down the road, but I could see any of those teams beating the other one in a 7-game series. No team really sticks out. I mean, I could probably make an argument that Milwaukee's still the best team because fit-wise, it's a great fit. Depth-wise, they're doing well, and they have arguably the best player out of all those teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing when you look at all 4 of these teams, Celtics, Sixers, Raptors, and Bucks, I mean, some team is going to be disappointed come second round.
Two teams
are going to be disappointed. I mean, and the implications, I think, are more interesting. What happens if the Celtics lose? Does Kyrie leave? What happens to the Raptors if they lose? Does Leonard leave? If the Sixers lose, do they lose Tobias and Jimmy Butler? I mean, the ramifications, I think, of these are what really stick out to me. But yeah, I think realistically, you're right, Nick. Until we see these guys on the floor, it's hard to say which one of these teams is going to be the clear-cut favorite.
I think the best argument for Philadelphia is they have the best starting lineup out of all the teams. Like, I think you can make that argument because they have probably 4 All-Stars in that. Like we said, Tobias Harris not named an All-Star, but if he played in the East all year, probably an All-Star.
Yeah, that's fair.
Now, moving on to another trade, Portland and Sacramento. Skal Lesbier to Portland, and Sacramento gets Caleb Swanigan. Not a big trade, just kind of a change of scenery. Reminds you of that Thon Maker, Stanley Johnson trade we talked about yesterday. Pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, our guy Cam T tweeted, I think earlier today, that you would love this college fans love this trade. It's a nothing move, but I think I like Caleb. I think he may have some run time in Sacramento, and Skal gets a chance in Portland. Change of scenery, really, like you mentioned with the Thon Maker deal.
Yeah, not going to really move anything in terms of this season. On to the next trade, a trade between both LA teams. The Clippers receive Beasley and Zubac. The Lakers get Mike Muscala. Weird trade, not expected. Didn't see this one coming.
I mean, this is what we all thought was going to happen if Anthony Davis wasn't acquired, right? We thought Mike Muscala was the clear-cut plan B. Yeah, I mean, we mentioned this a little bit off before we hopped on. Michael Beasley, why didn't you just waive him?
Yeah, he's already and then the Clippers already waived him.
Right. So, why didn't the Lakers waive him? And moving Zubac, who I think the last month or so was one of the rising young pieces of this Lakers core. And then, of course, you move him and you get Mike Muscala back. I think it was, I don't know. I wish I could have known the Lakers thinking behind this. I know they freeze up a roster spot for them to now go after the buyout market, which everyone is really going to be sought after. It doesn't move the needle for me enough for the Lakers. For the Clippers, it's an okay move because they waived Gortat, so now Zubac has a chance to become a possible franchise player for the Clippers.
Yeah, I mean, it's a guy they get, a young piece added to that roster because obviously they're going to, big fish hunting this summer, and they're going to be looking to get some of these free agents, not necessarily have cap to fill out the team. So having a guy like Zubac there on a good contract is not bad. From the Lakers side, like you said, Muscala can maybe add a little something, but he's not obviously Anthony Davis, and they have the open roster spot, which we'll talk about a little later when we talk buyouts. On to another trade that is purely salary. The Hawks receive Jabari Bird, and the Celtics receive a future second-round pick that's probably heavily protected or something along those lines, just a clear cap for Boston.
Yeah, I think Jabari Bird, I want to say he had law troubles before the season.
Yes, he did. Domestic violence, I'm pretty sure, was him.
Right,
so
yeah, that's pretty nasty.
Yeah, he hasn't been with the team, so obviously not much to talk about there. This was kind of a big trade. Orlando and Philadelphia. Orlando receives Markelle Fultz. Philadelphia receives Jonathan Simmons, a 2020 first-round pick via OKC, and a future second-round pick.
Yeah, I mean, we heard rumblings about Markelle Fultz basically the entire season that he might be dealt. I know you and I were Orlando Magic, Phoenix Suns, the two teams we dropped almost weekly. Whenever we talked about Fultz, we had those two teams not far behind his name, and Orlando got their guy. I'm okay with it from Orlando's perspective. You're rebuilding. You need a point guard for the future. This is a first overall draft pick. Will he be a bust? That's yet to be determined, but I think you take the risk for it because you really didn't give up anything. And for the Sixers, this just, to me, shows the value of Markelle Fultz at this point, right? Jonathan Simmons, yeah, you got a 2020 first-round pick from the Thunder, which probably isn't going to be that great in a future second-round pick, but, man, the value on Fultz was really low if this is the best they could get for him, but I like it for Orlando's perspective. That
Fultz-Jason Tatum trade looks horrendous right now, like at the highest degree. A lot of stuff can be said about that draft class, but like you said, Orlando side, good move. You get a point guard, you're taking a flyer on him. I don't think Markelle Fultz is done. Like, I think he'll be able to do okay and get back to a high level. I don't know if he'll ever hit his, draft stock, but he seems like he does have game. He just needs to get comfortable. There's not going to be a ton of pressure in Orlando. They're competing for the playoffs. They're probably not going to make it, so he should get minutes later in the season. Then on the Philadelphia side, you get Simmons, add some depth, and then you get some more draft picks after you just trade a few away in the Tobias Harris deal.
Yeah, I think the getting the draft picks back is the most important thing for the Sixers in this deal. Because like you said, they just depleted some of their assets long-term and they got some back. And I think Jonathan Simmons, I'm a fan of his game. Obviously, we mentioned a little bit off air too, that his shooting numbers aren't good this year. He can't really score offensively anymore, but he's got a chip on his shoulder. He does play good defense. So I don't think it's the worst necessary guy, but that bench unit for the Sixers, not a lot of shooting on there.
Yeah, definitely not a lot of shooting. That's why, when we talk buyouts, Wayne Ellington's going to be a name brought up. And Philadelphia did try to improve their bench, but obviously still need to add some more pieces there. And then probably I think the final trade of the day was Brooklyn and Toronto. Brooklyn receives Greg Monroe and a second-round pick. Toronto receives cash consideration. This is just a move for Toronto to kind of free up a roster spot as well as, I think, save some money.
The Brooklyn Nets once again get a draft pick when they bring somebody in. I don't know how Sean Marks does it, but it's basically if you want us to take somebody on, we need draft picks. So yeah, they get another asset. Greg Monroe, not terrible, obviously defensively, he's a liability, pretty good rebounder, decent post scorer. So I think he'll find some minutes in Brooklyn for you guys. But
he's already getting waived.
Is he really?
Yeah, he's already reportedly going to get waived. So.
Oh, all right. Well, they got a second-round pick then for it.
Exactly. And last time the Nets made a salary dump deal with the Raptors, it was DeMarre Carroll. They got Yana Musa and Rodion Skroots. So, it worked out last time for the Nets. Hopefully it turns out that way for them this time. Now, Kory, we're going to let's talk winners of the day first before we get into the buyouts. What teams won today and really took their team to another level?
I would have to say the Raptors right off the bat. I think anytime you add a guy like Marc Gasol, you're winning. I would say Orlando. I think Orlando won. I think anytime you get a young prospect back and you're not giving up too much in return, you win. I would say, even though it's not today, I still say the Sixers overall won. You piece together Tobias Harris and the smaller moves today, I would say they won. I would say that I want to say I think the Kings and Dallas are both winners too. And I know that's last night, but I think those would probably be the last. Those would be the teams I think are winners.
Yeah, for me, I'm looking at the top of the East like you did. I think
Oh,
Milwaukee,
Bucks. You're right. The Bucks. I don't know how I spaced on them.
yeah, Toronto, Philadelphia. I think they all won their trades. Well, didn't necessarily win their trades, but took their team to another level. So that's something to kind of look at. And I think I'm not like a giant fan of the Sacramento trade. I think Harrison Barnes is a good ad, but it's not like it's going to push them to another level. It probably will push them to the playoffs. Other than that, I don't think there was necessarily a ton of amazing moves. I guess we could throw Dallas in there because they did pick up Porzingis. And I think like some of the teams like Cleveland getting another first-round pick, being a bad team makes sense. And then, like you said, Orlando getting Markelle Fultz, a future piece. So I think some of the smaller moves really stick out, and then some of the bigger moves stick out as well. In terms of losers, which teams didn't make a move and they really need to make a move?
Well, I mean, my biggest loser made moves, and that's the Los Angeles Lakers. I still think they're the biggest loser just because of how often we have to talk about this team. This is a team that's all of a sudden talking about selling off everybody to get Anthony Davis. They want to make a win now move, and they made no win now moves. So that's one team I think lost. I think the Wizards, even though they got off Otto Porter Jr., I still think they lost because they apparently are going to extend Trevor Ariza and Jeff Green going forward. I don't really understand.
I think so. I think they're going to try. Yeah.
So I don't really understand. I think I probably would have moved on from those guys, but like that whole situation in Washington, as we know, is kind of a disaster and a mess. And then I think the Rockets lost. Personally, I think they needed to make a bigger move. Obviously, the buyout market could possibly change that for me if they got like a Wayne Ellington or some kind of 3-point help. But they didn't make enough moves, I think, that really pushed them farther because obviously James Harden has been incredible and the role players around them is what's lacking. I don't think they made enough moves.
Yeah, and I want to throw in one more winner that I didn't actually say before because they didn't technically make a big trade, but Boston, because Anthony Davis wasn't traded, so they kind of won a little bit today. But in terms of losers, going through the list, you're looking at teams, I think like Charlotte too, they need to go one way or the other. They needed to either compete and try to like get farther in the playoffs, or they needed to sell off some of their guys like a Jeremy Lamb, who they're probably not going to retain in the offseason. Another team is probably like Detroit. You just wasted a year. Blake Griffin got rid of some of your wings. Like you mentioned, Washington, we're not really sure what's going on in that situation. I would maybe say Atlanta's a loser because they didn't get anything for some of their players that they could have traded. But then again, they didn't want to take any future contracts. So that's something to consider in that situation. OKC, I think, probably should have made a smaller move. You mentioned Houston needed to make a move. They probably did if they wanted to get to where they were last season. Utah probably is a loser because they need to add one more piece to really make them a legit kind of playoff contender in the West, a team that could get to the second round or even Western Conference Finals. They didn't add that point guard. They didn't add that offensive pop. And like you said, obviously the Lakers been talked about making trades for 3 months, and they didn't make one big trade at all. They traded for a couple guys, and their biggest move was probably opening a roster spot.
You hit the nail on the head with the Detroit Pistons. That's an absolute debacle, not being able to add any talent, not being able to make any moves. That team really did miss the boat. And I think you made a great point. I mean, obviously OKC, I think is going to be a buyout candidate on some of these guys, but not being able to get a guy like Alec Burks for what Cleveland gave up for him, not being able to get a guy like that or a Amon Shumpert, I think they missed the boat a little bit on that. And you're right. The Utah, they probably need another piece to really make a deep playoff run.
And I just got to throw this out there, a really big trade deadline acquisition that wasn't actually a trade, but my Brooklyn Nets getting back Karis LeVert for tomorrow's game is pretty big news. It's
funny. We talked about that earlier in the week, right? That we didn't know if he was going to be back by like this week or not. And Friday, it's happy Friday. Thank God it's Friday tomorrow.
Yeah, Jack asked me last night in the Brooklyn Buzz, if I thought he'd be back. And initially, when he asked me in the previous episode, I was like, I'm not sure. But then last night, I was like, there's a 50% chance because Ian Eagle hinted on it on the broadcast. And then I was like, all right, he's going to play. Obviously, he's going to get worked back in. But it's pretty much a fringe all-star addition for the Nets.
Yeah, crucial, huge. Obviously, where they're sitting in the standings at 6, the nice win they had over the Denver Nuggets last night, where you had no faith. I want everybody to know that Nick had no faith the Nets were going to win. We hopped off the pod.
He's lying. He's lying. Don't listen to him.
We hopped off the pod yesterday. He's like, I'm going to go watch the Nets lose. He's like, I don't care, though. And they won for you.
The trade deadline is going to keep me up. You know what it was? Alan Crabb coming back. He just changed everything in 13 minutes.
Yeah.
Big props to them. They just played with great energy. The bench really got them cooking. But back to some of the trade deadline stuff. Looking at some of the guys who are either reportedly bought out or about to be bought out, we're looking at Wesley Matthews possibly going to your Pacers. Looks like a guarantee. Enes Kanter, Michael Beasley, Milos Teodosic, Greg Monroe, Wayne Ellington, Morrison Gartott, Carmelo Anthony, Frank Kaminsky. Out of these guys, who is the most exciting to you? Obviously, we could talk Wesley Matthews to the Pacers first, though.
Yeah, I mean, Wesley Matthews to the Pacers. I mean, I would even consider the Pacers a loser at the deadline, because I think with all the expirings they have, it wouldn't have hurt for them to kind of acquire some assets. What Wesley Matthews does, though, is he fills the void of Victor Oladipo. Obviously, he's not going to bring the offensive impact, but he's a defensive-minded player. The Pacers focus on defense, so he will kind of slide right into that. He is a decent three-point shooter, which is an issue for the Pacers. We don't have a lot of floor spacers. So it's a solid move for the Pacers, who clearly want to contend still. They want to make the playoffs. They want to be a threat in the playoffs. I don't think they're, those is probably tier 3. But I think it was a solid move for them. I don't know what the contract's going to look like when they sign them, but it's a good move for a team that needed some help after losing Oladipo.
Yeah, I think it's like a prorated veteran minimum, so it's not going to be anything too crazy because it's only like less than half of the season. But like you said, it's a solid move. It'll keep them kind of in, they're going to drop in the playoff standings in terms of where they're at now. I think they'll probably drop to 5th. Obviously, with Philadelphia making a move like that, I don't think they'll get under 6th. I mean, under 5th. So pretty much keeps them where they're at. They'll have another solid playoff run. They won't go deep, but I think it kind of keeps the culture intact, and it's just a good move to kind of keep those guys in a winning mentality.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, what guys out there right now do you think can help the team the most? Like help any team, talking from the guys I mentioned, from Kanter, Beasley, Monroe, Ellington, whoever it is, and then we could talk about afterwards some other guys you think are going to get bought out.
I mean, the biggest name to me that sticks out is Wayne Ellington. Mm-hmm. Being the best three-point shooter on the market right now, I think he's probably a guy that we've kind of mentioned, the Sixers, the Lakers, the Warriors, I think, even has some interest in them. Any team that needs somebody to space the floor and shoot some threes, I think Ellington is probably the guy you're looking for. So for me, he's probably the best buyout market candidate we have. I think look at a guy like Kanter. Yeah, I mean, if you need some offensive pop off the bench and some rebounding, Kanter can do that. It's just you got to understand that come playoff time, you just can't really use him. The defensive liability kind of hurts you in the playoffs, especially when you get matched up against like a team, for example, like if you're getting matched against the Warriors, like they're going to tear him apart and pick and rolls and everything else, drag him away from the basket. So I think it just depends on the fit. But Ellington's a guy that, for me, I'm really interested to see where he goes.
Yeah, Ellington, I think, makes the most sense because he's such a complementary piece. He's not a guy that's going to play big minutes, but he's going to give you instant shooting off the bench, give you some spacing, could give you a burst. He's a guy that could easily score 15 minutes in 12 minutes. So I think that's a guy that's probably going to be the hottest commodity out there. Like you mentioned, some of the other bigs will definitely be fill-ins, but they're not going to have a huge impact come playoff time. Who are some other names you think could be bought out?
Just some guys that I looked at from some rumors and stuff. I know Frank Kaminsky is a name I saw out there. I know our guy Evan Dial hates him and says he's trash.
I concur.
I think you said it first in our OTG group chat. He confirmed it. But yeah, I think he's an interesting guy for a team looking for a stretch four. J.R. Smith, I don't know what the Cavaliers' mindset is with J.R. Smith. What are you holding on to him for? He hasn't played in over, 2.5 months now, it feels like. Markieff Morris, if he gets healthy in New Orleans, I wouldn't be surprised if they bought him out because I think he could be used better elsewhere. But those are the big names that I have. And those are the big names.
You mentioned the Hawkeyes on there?
Oh, no, I didn't. Jeremy Lin, Dwayne Dedman, Kent Bazemore, they probably won't waive his contract too much at $18 million. But Jeremy Lin, Dwayne Dedman, I think those are probably two candidates. I wouldn't be surprised to see Dedman bought out. It's only $6 million, so that kind of makes sense for them not to have to spend too much. And that's a guy who a lot of teams would be looking at, probably like the Rockets, who we've mentioned before on this podcast. Teams that are looking for a 5 who can shoot.
Yeah, he's definitely a nice stretch 5, somebody who can give you a nice boost. Even Jeremy Lin, if he's bought out, that's a nice playmaking, a guard that can play 1 or 2. And Kory, we do have a couple more questions from our guys at OTG. Cam T, what is a trade that looks good now but won't age well at all?
I mean, you can make a case that the Marc Gasol trade looks good now but could age really poorly for both sides, arguably.
No, that's a really good point. I think that's probably one that could go terribly wrong if Kawhi doesn't resign. Now you're stuck with, Lowry and Gasol both making 25 plus mil.
Especially if Lowry continues to get hurt. I mean, losing a backup point guard like Delon Wright could really hurt if you got to lean heavily on Fred VanVleet.
And then also, I think you look at the Clippers and Philadelphia trade. If Philadelphia wasn't able to retain Tobias Harris and giving up all those picks, that wouldn't definitely not age well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could also. I don't think it could age that poorly, but the Magic Sixers trade for Fultz. Fultz never gets back to who he is. Maybe you slightly regret it, but again, you didn't give up too much.
Or it could go the opposite direction where Fultz becomes an all-star, and now Philadelphia didn't really get a great value for him.
Good twist there, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of these trades can go either way, especially when you're trading, I think, any player under 24 years old and you don't really know what their ceiling is.
Yeah, I would even make a case, it happened yesterday, but the Otto Porter Jr. for Jabari Parker and Bobby Portis Jr., depending on how that plays out, that could be also a pretty poor trade.
Yeah, I think Otto Porter, taking up the cap space, but like we kind of said, I don't know if they'll be able to even use the cap space if they did have it there.
Right, yeah.
Sacramento, I think the Harrison Barnes thing isn't too bad, so I won't say that one will age bad. Any other trades stick out that you think won't age well, that look really good right now, but they'll end up being bad in the future?
Nah, I think I'm okay with all of them right now, besides the ones we mentioned.
I think from I don't know necessarily if it looks good. Some people think it looks bad right now. It's the Knicks in Mavs trade, where I think it could look bad for the Knicks right now, but if they're able to land people in the summer, then all of a sudden the trade looks really good. And hypothetically, it could look bad for Dallas if Porzingis can't get back to 100% or he gets injured again.
Right. I'm still a fan of that trade. I still like how it played out for both sides.
Yeah. So now moving on, we got another question from another one of our fellows at OTG, Nick C. Rank your new top four in the East.
Okay. I know I said the Sixers were the best team before, but I'm revising that. So I'm going to say Bucks, Sixers, Celtics, Raptors.
Say them for me one more time.
Bucks, Sixers, Celtics, Raptors. I still like the Celtics depth. And I just think those three teams, they're a little bit deeper than the Raptors. The Raptors' depth to me is still a little bit of a concern.
It's extremely difficult. Nick, thanks for the hard question. Appreciate it. We should get you on here to answer it.
Phone a friend.
Phone a friend. If we're talking right now, like literally right now, and then I think I do a different ranking for the playoffs, I think Milwaukee's still number one. I think Toronto did enough to make themselves number two, and then number three, Philadelphia, number four, Boston for right now. But come playoff time, I think Boston gets boosted up. And I actually might boost up Toronto because I like their defensive versatility and just the way they can throw so many different lineups at you. It's extremely tough because we haven't seen these teams on the court. You know what I mean? How these new ads are going to fit in. So like I said, I'm going to take another cop out. I think it easily could fluctuate 1 through 4 on a regular basis. Ask me again when the playoffs start.
Don't worry, I'll hold true to mine.
I won't. Anything else, Kory, that you're thinking?
On what?
In terms of the trade deadline, buyout market, things that can change?
Is there any Robin Lopez? What?
So there was talk about him getting bought out, and now Bulls front office has said that they're not going to buy him out, which is just rude.
Which is just rude. Yeah, I mean, I think that would have been an interesting guy just to see a contender maybe swoop him up like the Warriors. I think we mentioned before on the outlet, just looking for some toughness, like kind of like that Zaza Pachulia effect. Aside from that, man, there's not a lot of other things that have my attention. I did see a rumor that maybe if Pau Gasol asked to be bought out, he could be an interesting candidate, I think, but I don't think he's going to want out. San Antonio has that culture that everybody seems to love besides Kawhi Leonard. So I don't think Gasol will be looking to get out.
How much do you think this trade deadline impacted free agency?
Majorly, hugely. And it may not have even impacted it from like a team to a player standpoint, but like a player to a team standpoint. What I mean by that is we kind of mentioned this, deep playoff runs. What happens, if the Celtics get bounced in the second round? Does Kyrie want to stay or does he go elsewhere? I think that's like the biggest thing is all these teams in the East in particular, they all have a lot of expirings, a lot of guys playing for deep playoff runs, and only 2 teams can make a deep playoff run. Only 1 team can make the NBA Finals out of these 4 teams that made a lot of moves to win now. So how does that change your superstars mentality if you don't have a deep playoff run? So I think that to me is probably the most interesting development following this deadline.
Do you think Kyrie might look back at at this like trade deadline if the Celtics were to get knocked out in the second round and be like, oh man, they didn't make a move. Like, are they really committed, or are they just like so worried about Anthony Davis and not winning now? Do you think that could impact his decision?
For sure. I think no question, especially, if looking at some of the guys, Terry Rozier, did you really have to hold on to him? I understand holding on to him because Kyrie kind of misses some time from here and then. Marcus Smart can't really shoot. So Terry Rozier is like a steady backup point guard. But yeah, they didn't make any moves. There's been a lot of talk of maybe moving a Jaylen Brown or whatever just to free up some minutes. So yeah, I think if they with them standing packed, they don't. I don't think they're going to be a buyout market team, a buyout candidate either. I don't think they're going after any of these guys we've named. So I think Kyrie could look at that being like, wow, they wasted one of my years where I'm having one of my best seasons. Arguably, this is one of Kyrie's best seasons, I think. And maybe, he could grow upset with that.
Yeah, and it's definitely something to consider. Just talking a little bit, Anthony Davis, obviously talked about that till nauseum for like the last almost, it feels like month. It's really only been a couple weeks. What do you think happens now? Do you think the Lakers are still going to end up with him, or Boston's going to swoop in, or there's going to be a mystery team, or that fact that he's mentioned the Knicks so much, the Knicks are going to get a top 3 pick in the lottery and swing that for AD?
I mean,
and also another question, actually, before I throw this out there, is this whole mindset that Anthony Davis really wants to win championships a lie, and he really just wants to play in a big market?
I mean, I know Preston Ellis is hammering that narrative home that this is not about winning. Because
it doesn't seem like it, to be honest.
No, it doesn't. I mean, I don't know who tweeted it, but the 2 top teams are the Lakers and Knicks, right? So let's put this into perspective. The Knicks haven't had a playoff run relevant since 2012, 2013, and Roy Hibbert.
And I don't even know if you want to call that relevant. They got in the second round. The Pacers were favored in that series, and we knew they were going to win. And I'll throw the stat out there, and yeah, I'm a Knicks hater probably. No team has lost more games than the Knicks since the year 2000.
And who's their owner? James Dolan.
And doesn't know how to treat players. Like, it's been there's a reason Porzingis wanted to leave. It just wasn't because Porzingis is an asshole. Like, there was a reason they didn't treat him right, and the whole organization is kind of dysfunctional.
And as he said, stay woke, New York Knicks fans. He said you deserve better. So, I mean, the alarm should be flaring for that one. And then, like you mentioned, I mean, Melo, for what it's worth, you can hate Melo and not like Melo and whatever you think. Melo was an all-star, top 5 scorer in the NBA for a decade, and that end of that tenure with the New York Knicks, they treated him terribly. A guy who played his prime of the career with them, obviously didn't have any success, but it wasn't because of Melo. He had some great years in New York. So, yeah, you look at that and you go, wow, why would you want to go there? And then you look at the Lakers.
The only argument for the Knicks, sorry to cut you off, Kory, would be that there's a guarantee that Kevin Durant's going there. That's the only reason that it would make sense.
Right.
And that's a possibility.
And that's the one thing that all of the teams that he has on his list, aside from the Bucks, which was just like let me throw out like a pipe dream, but the Clippers, Lakers, and the Knicks, all of those teams can pitch who do you want to play with? Yeah, that's the pitch, right? Do you want to play with LeBron and maybe someone else? Do you want to come to New York and play with Kevin Durant? Do you want to come to LA and play with Kawhi? Like, that's the only thing those teams can really pitch them. But like you mentioned, the Lakers, if they want to get AD, they're giving up everything. So what are you? It doesn't make, if you throw in, the guys that the Lakers have now and you then implement AD with LeBron, then that's a really good team. But if you got to get rid of everybody and then start fresh around LeBron and AD, the roster that you fill may not even be, championship worthy. So yeah, I think the narrative that it's about winning is bullshit.
Yeah, it definitely is interesting. It seems like he wants to be in a big market and maybe have a shot at winning. Like, there's an argument for the Knicks getting better in the offseason, but it's still not close to a guarantee. It's just a big risk. And with the Lakers, at least they have LeBron, so you can make an argument there. They will have cap space to sign someone relatively big if they were to move all those guys for AD, but it wouldn't be a full max spot, I believe.
Right, and that's the one thing, too, I guess you could throw into, the side of the bigger market is that unlike New Orleans, even if you are bad for a couple of years in a big market, you will always have the opportunity to become, a playoff contender because you have that much money and, capital to spend. The Pelicans will never really have that amount of money to keep you competitive every year.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be hard for you to attract someone in New Orleans. You know what I mean? Even if you're on the Knicks, you play one bad season, next year you have cap space, all of a sudden, hey, we just signed the other best free agent out there because we're playing in New York, and it just makes a lot of sense.
And they always sell out.
Yeah, and to be honest, if I was a player, I'd probably want to play in a big market too. I'm not taking a shot at him, but I just think, don't try to make it all about winning. I think some of it is the big market and some of it is winning.
Yeah.
But back to the original question, do you think put your percentages at the chances of teams that he'll go to? Like, let's just go with the Lakers, Knicks, and Celtics, and then we'll go with one mystery team. You don't have to name it.
Okay. For the Lakers, I'll say 70% still. I still think that's probably the front runner. The Knicks, I'll say 60%. And then for the Celtics, I'm going to say 50%, and I'll give the dark horse team like a 20% chance because it really just depends. And the reason the Celtics, what happened?
Let's do this all out of 100%.
Damn. Okay. All right. Well, that changes things a little bit. All right. So so I'll give the Lakers a 50% chance. I'll give the Clippers a 20% chance. That I'm at 70. I'll give the Celtics 15%, which leaves me 15%, right? Left?
Yeah, I think so.
That's right. That's right. 50, 20, 15, 15. That's 100 in my books.
Yeah.
And then the 15 will be the dark horse team out there. And the reason I had the Celtics so low is because I think this playoff run is going to define this Anthony Davis sweepstakes. Because the fact of the matter is, Kyrie has made it clear that he ain't like locked into this shit. And if they fall apart and they get bounced in the second round to an Antetokounmpo or a Joel Embiid or a Kawhi Leonard, and then Kyrie walks, you can't trade Tatum for Davis, and you're out. And then you're out of the Anthony Davis sweepstakes just like that. I mean, Kyrie Irving really is like the key factor on whether or not they're going to get Anthony Davis.
Kyrie could be the key factor the entire offseason, to be honest. Kyrie's like, I'm going to New York. I want KD to come play with me. There was talks about him wanting out, but obviously that's for a couple months from now. Yeah, I think I probably have 30% for the Lakers, 30% for the Celtics. I'll give the Knicks maybe 20%, so I'm 80%, and then 20% for the other team, whatever the dark horse is.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, and then if the Clippers are actually truly in there, maybe I'll subtract 5% from all the teams and then give them 15%, or excluding the dark horse team. So I think, like you said, the Lakers are probably in the favorite, but the Celtics will definitely offer the biggest package, or have the ability to offer the best package. Will they offer it? We don't know. Will AD be open to re-signing? I don't think the Celtics really care, because I think their viewpoint is that we have Kyrie, we have AD, we win a championship. He's not leaving. Yeah,
I agree. And just on the Celtics front, I'm still I'm not sure that he's going to throw Jason Tatum in that package. I know
he's playing them, to be honest. That's my personal gut feeling.
Yeah, and it kind of screws over the Lakers in the now, and then, it may push the Pelicans to maybe not even have a chance to talk with the Lakers this coming offseason. Who knows how things develop? I mean, in the NBA, we've seen this. Things change monthly, it feels like, weekly at times even. So it'll depend.
And the postseason will have a big impact on a lot of different teams, like we talked about, from Kyrie to Kawhi to the Lakers. Kyrie, he's a great player. But that'll wrap it up, guys. As always, appreciate everybody checking it out, viewing, listening, whatever it is. iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OGGBasketball.com, Google Play, Dash Radio, and YouTube.
Peace out, knuckleheads.